Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about cozy fantasy and how it has changed my life. This is the first video I'm filming in this slightly new setup. I don't know if it's going to be the first video you're seeing, but it's the first video that I'm filming. So I'm going to do some quick admin bits. I mean, the whole admin is basically I used to sit back there and now I sit here, and I think this is cute. I feel like you get a better sense of the space in this room. You can see more of the shelves. I don't know, it just feels a little bit cozier. You can see that I've got these two massive shelves that I need to fill. That probably won't last long because I've got a massive book haul to film after this. And the reason I've got that space now is because I built this bookcase, and I was thinking about filming that, but then trying to build the shelf I had a meant to be, so I didn't. But I feel like this is cute. I feel like this is cozy. I feel like I should have one of those little fluffy mics that the proper booktubers have. Also, just ignore the Leaning Tower of Teresa. We're trying to fix it. Okay, so cozy fantasy. So I have dabbled in fantasy over the years, and the conclusion I came to was that it wasn't really for me. I read the 3 Lord of the Rings books, and that was a waste of my life. That was kind of a phase in my reading where I felt like there were certain books that I should read to be a proper reader, and I now realize that's nonsense. I read the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire, and again, just thought it was fine, had no desire to carry on with the series. I read one Terry Pratchett book, and I thought it was fine, although based on this epiphany that I've had around cozy fantasy, I feel like I should give Terry Pratchett more of a go, but he has so many books that I don't really know how to wrap my head around reading his books. And then if we think about more kind of contemporary stuff that I maybe am more so the target audience for, so I'm thinking like your big fantasy and more recently romantasy series that the Book Talk girlies are into. I've never been able to get into those books either. I read a couple of Sarah J Maas books maybe 10 years ago, and again, just didn't really get into them. I remember ACOTAR being big the first time round, and now that it's having this kind of ACOTAR renaissance, if you will, and it's gone beyond even like reading communities. Like friends I have that don't really read at all have been mad into ACOTAR. They've been like getting their boyfriends to read it. It's become a whole thing. That started to give me like a little bit of FOMO, and even people who I wouldn't expect to be into the series who are big readers have been saying it's like candy floss for their brain. So I do feel like a slight desire to maybe try that sort of genre again. There are pockets of fantasy that I've enjoyed. So some fantasy that has been quite female-led, but specifically about witches, I've enjoyed. So I'm thinking series like Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. I do like that series. But generally a lot of the things I associate with fantasy series I'm just not interested in. So in adult fantasy, I'm not really interested in like dragons or whatever quest someone's on where they need to kill someone and there's loads of violence, and in the romantasy stuff there's all this tension. I've just never really cared for that. I think sometimes I've just felt like there are so many things that are interesting about the world that we already live in, that there's something about fantasy that just hasn't drawn me in. What I do enjoy quite a lot is middle grade fantasy. I do read a lot of middle grade, partially for my job, partially just because I enjoy it, but I've always found middle grade fantasy ticks more boxes for me. Even if they do have the kind of chosen one quest or the dragons and magical creatures, they're sometimes done in such a way that I would say is more kind of whimsy than like serious. And there's something about having your eyes opened to this world through the lens of a child reader, where they have the marvel and excitement in learning about this world and finding out the secrets of this world, that has always felt really sort of comforting and cozy to me. And cozy is the key word here. Earlier this year, I read The Vanishing Game by Meg Schaefer, and I would say this is like fantasy adjacent. This felt like a middle grade novel about grown-ups. Then in October, I read Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood, which is just ultimate cozy autumnal vibes. So this is a book about kind of the nature of storytelling and a book about books. This has a lovely bookshop and cups of tea and is about witches. So I wasn't hugely surprised that I enjoyed these books so much. But then I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, and this one I wasn't so sure I was gonna like, but I really did. And in my head, this is cozy fantasy, right? When you think about what the main character of this book is doing, it's actually pretty mundane. And while this is definitely a fantasy book, I found it was more so about found family, and it was about not judging people based on your preconceptions, and it was about ensuring children have proper childhoods and are given the best opportunities in life and aren't judged for where they came from. And I enjoyed it so much. And it was when I finished reading this book that I had this kind of epiphany that maybe cozy fantasy is the way for me to go. And I would say all of those books are about someone who perceives themselves to be quite ordinary and unremarkable, discovering a bit of a spark again. I also think middle grade fantasy typically focuses on more kind of everyday aspects of the world. So one of the things that I didn't really like about what I associated with fantasy was these really like complicated magical systems that I simply could not be arsed to wrap my head around. And of course there are some middle grade books that have really complicated magical systems or really intricately woven magical systems, but I think even in those books they also really focus on like atmosphere and setting. So there's often really gorgeous descriptions of kind of the food that there is in this new world, or the clothing people are wearing, or what's slightly different about the climate, like things that I can recognize from our own real life world, but with a slight twist. So all of that to say, if you have any cozy fantasy recommendations for books for grown-ups, please leave them in a comment down below. Obviously Legends and Lattes is already on my radar, so if there's anything else you'd like to recommend, please leave me a comment down below. That's kind of it for the book chat portion of this discussion, but I also want to further contextualize my newfound enjoyment for cozy fantasy with my broader life. So if you're also interested in that, stick around for the next few minutes. I think my newfound love for cozy fantasy coincides with my newfound love for coziness overall. I am definitely someone that is an extrovert. I've always loved kind of getting out and about, doing lots of things, meeting lots of new people, hanging out with my friends. I've always been kind of on the go until this year, really. I say this year, it's probably 2025 when you're seeing this video, so until 2024. And there are a few different reasons why I think I embraced being a bit more cozy, being a bit more of a homebody in 2024. I think just partially the degree to which I was being incredibly busy was just not sustainable. I think partially, like now being in my late 20s, which, I mean, look, I'm not saying that's old at all, but I am saying I have less energy than I had when I was 22. But I also don't purely mean that in terms of like physical aging. I kind of mean it in terms of like my life position. So throughout my 20s, I lived in a number of flats that just weren't nice. Or I lived with several housemates, so there was always kind of someone to do something with. There was always something to do. There was always some sort of opportunity to socialize. Whereas the flat I live in now, it's just me and one other person, and our main, I'm gonna say house rule, our main like house rule is that it must be cozy. We love having plants, we love having candles, we love having all of our books, we love soft furnishings and coziness. And it sounds really simple to say, but I love where I live, so I feel less inclined to go out. I think another factor is being in a relationship, and I talk about this relationship as if it's like brand new. We have been together like over 2 years now, but I think it's that classic thing that is always kind of said about the difference between being single and being in a relationship is kind of when you're single and you don't have plans, you don't have plans. Whereas when you're in a long-term relationship and you don't have plans, if you're still spending the weekend together, you still kind of do stuff. You're still being a bit social. And then if I do have like those weekends where I'm not hanging out with my boyfriend, I love them because I'm like, oh, it's me time. What am I going to do with this me time? I'm going to sit on the sofa and read my book. What has also coincided with my discovery of cozy fantasy is my discovery of cozy gaming. I have become addicted to Stardew Valley. I have sunk over 200 hours into that farm. I've been thinking about getting a Switch for quite a long time now, and I finally bit the bullet maybe halfway through the year, and honestly, it has completely changed my life. I love cozy games. If you guys are interested, I could do a whole video talking about the cozy games that I played in 2024 and kind of reviewing them. Is that something you'd be interested in? But I've really found that cozy gaming has been a way for me to like switch my brain off from all of the intensity that is often in my brain. Cozy gaming has been like the perfect way for me to kind of switch off. And sometimes, depending on what game I'm playing, I will also listen to an audiobook at the same time. And I found that so enjoyable. And where this links back round to books, and I'm slightly going to over intellectualize this here, but I think as women, when we become grown-ups. We are discouraged from play. Now, this obviously doesn't apply to all women, and what I'm about to say about men obviously doesn't apply to all men, and I'm being annoyingly binary about gender when I talk about this, but I think typically how men are socialized is they are encouraged to maintain play into their adulthood. So whether that is playing video games together and having a social aspect with gaming with friends online, or being in a five-a-side football team that you play in every Sunday. Whereas for the most part, women aren't encouraged to maintain those hobbies. And I know so many women that have picked up things like playing a sport again now that they're in like their late 20s after years of not doing it. And I think the same thing applies to gaming. Women as a collective have not been typically encouraged, or it hasn't been the norm for women to continue playing video games. Women typically have a greater pressure to be productive in everything that they are doing. And I mean, it's a whole separate conversation what it is like to be a woman in the gaming community that I'm not going to go into here. But I think my discovery and how I have embraced play in cozy gaming is also how I feel about cozy fantasy. It has allowed me to embrace the things that I love about reading for children in books that are intended for grown-ups. That's everything I have to say on this topic. In many ways, I have totally overcomplicated saying, I read 3 books and I'd like to read more books like that, please. But I think this is interesting, so maybe you do too. If you've made it this far in the video and you don't have anything in particular to say, but you want to let me know you're here, leave me an emoji that conveys coziness to you. However you wish to interpret that, I leave it in your hands. That's it from me. I hope you're doing well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.